you, Steve, for the very generous flattering introduction. Thank you, everyone, for making time to come during your busy working day or study day. I really appreciate that. Today is a lucky coincidence. It's also the Chinese New Year, and this is the year of the dragon. And we hope everyone take this good opportunity to have a very productive and joyful year. My topic is today is this transnational migration and community, a tale of two cities. I'll be comparing Chicago and St. Louis, but mostly I will be focusing on Chicago because this is my book, Chinese in Chicago, just released actually last week. Last week was our official release day, and the Truman bookstore is sponsoring for this event. So to promote the sales, we're going to focus more on Chicago and make it more relevant. But meanwhile, we can refer to St. Louis. If some of you are from St. Louis or the metropolitan area, you can make some comparison. And you can also stop me anytime if you want to know anything more or I didn't explain clearly enough. Okay? So I'm going to follow the order in the next page. But before that, I just want to briefly to see something. Why I studied Chicago. You might wonder, did I in Kirksville, why I'm in Chicago? I want to begin with this song. Okay? A song. It was sung by Sinatra and by probably many other people. But Sinatra's version was, I guess, a very popular one. I wish I could sing it, but I'm not really good at it. Just here, I have one of the stanza in quotation. And each time I go, Chicago is calling me home. Chicago is one town that won't let it down. It's my kind of town. So I think this song really best captures the promise of Chicago. Chicago is a city with a promise which was evidenced by immigrants 150 years ago, as well as by politicians. The more recent example, a very compelling one is our President Obama, right, who came to Chicago in 1985 as a community worker in the far south side of Chicago. But 23 years later, he became president in 2008, right, which was a historical event, the first African-American president in the U.S. history. So the promise of Chicago, as we know, is known for immigrants, politicians, because Chicago is a hub of transportation, water, rail, and in the recent time, air transportation. Because of the convenience, that is why it attracted a lot of people, either from near, within the United States, or from far away, from all corners of the world. Just because this transportation advantage and Chicago's other characteristics. The reason I got interested in Chicago is that during my graduate school, when I was doing my PhD, I started doing Chinese women and Asian women, and I realized that there are very little sources, or very little information or written work on Chinese in the Midwest, or Asian American in the Midwest, or even ethnic Americans in the Midwest. So Midwest has been an area which has been neglected in a way by scholars. And Chicago as a great city, it was known as the second city in 1890s. However, it hasn't received the credits it deserves. And in terms of Asian American studies, which is my field of research, starting from my dissertation on Chinese women, Asian American women, I further expanded to communities in the Midwestern area. Even Midwestern, but this area has been referred by scholars as the so-called Great Third Coast, compared to the East Coast and West Coast. Well, traditionally, people think of Asians or Chinese like to settle in these two coasts, and it is still true. Today, 60% of the Chinese and Asian population still settle and resided on coastal areas. However, the Midwest like Midwest and the South, has appeared as a so-called great third coast with a rapid population increase in Asian America, this group. In the recent decades, the population not only tripled but doubled and 4 times growth. So there's really, it's important for community activists or scholars to reflect the reality, this fast population growth, and reconstruct their history. That's how I got interested in that. So my order of presentation would follow this, which is also more or less same as the order of the book chapters in my book, Chinese in Chicago. Okay, the first chapter is about the background, searching roots. Then I describe how this Chinatown evolved. Then we focus on the economic conditions in Chinatown and the social structure, family life, and communities, okay, the community organizations. And finally, I'll come to the conclusion and also make some comparisons between Chicago and St. Louis. Chinese in Chicago or St. Louis or anywhere else share similar background. Okay, why did they come here? Mainly, they come from a very small concentrated area. Even China was abroad, a vast country. But mainly, these early Chinese immigrants came from 7 counties in South China, Guangdong province. In the south part, I don't know if I can have this laser pointer there. So if you look at this map, the south, very near the border, that is the Guangdong province. And that is the area most Chinese immigrants came from in the early time, from many 7 counties. 3 counties near this river in the very south of this map is called Pearl River or Westview. Okay, in the Pearl River area, Pearl River Delta area, and some 3 counties here in the Canton, which is the capital city of Guangdong province. And they mostly are from that area. So you might wonder why Chinese came, right? Many scholars like to use this pair of paradigm, okay, the pull and the push. This is a term, the pair of a term used by physicists. Okay, this is a physicist term to describe all the forces or movement in the natural world. But immigration scholars used it to apply immigration in U.S. And that also applies to Chinese immigrants in this time. The Chinese were pushed mainly by internal disasters, okay, wars. Okay. In 1840s, there were wars by Western powers, so-called Opium Wars, and China lost the war. So that forced many Chinese opened the ports, more ports, so that resulted in this economic center shift further north. And so the Chinese in this Guangdong province, many of them got dislocated, lost job. So going overseas become a viable option. And meanwhile, we also see push, right? In addition to pushing force, we also see this pulling force. Pulling force came to the United States, which generally is the economic opportunity, good economic opportunity, religious freedom, right? Political freedom. So those are the reasons for all groups of immigrants. For the Chinese and other immigrants who came in mid-19th century, one big attraction is gold. We all know that gold discovered in California in 1848. So either European immigrants or Chinese immigrants all came here trying to find gold. And the gold that time was relatively easy to find, right? One of the simplest methods that we can see from here is called penny. You don't need to have any advanced tools or equipment. Just to take a pen, a metal pen. You do that. You keep shaking it in the river or stream, and the gold, which is a heavy metal, will settle at the bottom of the pen. That's how you find the gold and use this gold particles and collect them, make gold nuggets. And that's That's how most gold miners worked. When Chinese came, most gold mine already worked out. Chinese usually they worked in the mines left by the white miners, and they worked very hard. So this is one of the occupations Chinese engaged in. The second one is building railroad. After gold mine worked out, what did they do? When the Civil War was over, United States began to develop the entire economy into, the country into one economy. In order to push the economy westward, this transcontinental railroad became essential. In the construction of transcontinental railroad, in the west part, the Chinese really played a significant role, which is relatively unknown by most Americans. And in the construction of the western part, 90% of the labor force actually the Chinese from South China. And initially they were kind of like used as an experiment because American railroad contractors couldn't find workers. Initially they hired European laborers, Italians, Irish workers, but people abandoned the job as the pay was not high, $30 a month. Job was dangerous because they have to open the mountain, make tunnels below the mountain. That time the dynamite was just invented, very unsafe. So oftentimes they don't explode, ignite at the right time. So this injury was very often. Because of that, people deserted this job. So the railroad company, the so-called Big Four, one of them was Stanford, the founder of Stanford University. So he did an experiment. He said, let's try to hire Chinese. So they hired a group of Chinese, and the Chinese proved they are physically small, but they're very efficient. They work together collectively, and they proved they are able. So then this railroad company decided to hire a large number of Chinese. So eventually, more than 10,000 of Chinese working on the western part of this railroad construction. So when the railroad was finished in 1869, the Chinese are not needed. And it so happens that this also is a time America had economic recession, as we have now. So on the West Coast, there's very strong anti-Chinese sentiment. The white laborers and agricultural workers all organized this campaign. They had the slogans that the Chinese must go. We don't need them. They need to go. So a lot of Chinese went to China, but many still remain. What did they do? Many of them came to Midwest, large area in the Midwest. Some went to the South. Okay, the South went to the sugar plantation, cotton plantation to replace the ex-slave workers, because these Chinese are from South China. They were accustomed to this hot climate. Okay? So many of them were used to replace the ex-slaves, but many more came to the Midwest and many landed in Chicago. Because this is a city with the transportation advantage, as I said earlier, and it also later on became the city's so-called capital of architecture, right? All its high rises. And it also was a retail center. The Chicago process and redistribute agricultural produces, manufactures, right? Furnitures, steels. So it became, by 1870s and 1890s, Chicago was the country's largest processing and redistributing center for agricultural works as well as for other manufactured goods, including clothing, furniture, steels. And under this circumstance, Chinese came, like all immigrants. Chinese liked this town, okay, because they felt, in the word of this Chinese pioneer, we have a picture here. Okay, this gentleman's name was Moi Dongzhou, and he was the oldest brother of the so-called three Moi brothers. Okay, they were very famous. The three Moi brothers were the pioneer Chinese immigrants in Chicago. So if you're in Chicago, you must know Moi brothers. So this first Moi brother, Moi Dongzhou, said in many years